What would you do if you lost everything? Not just your car keys or your phone, but everything that made life worth living. Your family, your purpose, your reason to wake up in the morning. This is a story about a man who faced that darkness and about the night that pulled him back into the light. Meet James Mitchell, a detective in the quiet town of Riverside, Pennsylvania. If you looked at his life from the outside, you'd think he had it all figured out. A beautiful wife named Sarah with a smile that could light up a room. A son, Tommy, who was obsessed with baseball and had his father's laugh. And a job that gave him purpose, protecting people, keeping his community safe. His days were simple and perfect. Weekend barbecues where the smell of grilled burgers filled the air. Little league games where Tommy would wave at him from second base. Quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun go down with Sarah's hand in his. It was the kind of life people dream about, the kind you think will last forever. But forever ended on a winter night in 1995. Route 42 was a road James had driven 1,000 times. But that night, black ice turned it into a trap. One patch of invisible danger, one moment of lost control. And suddenly, Sarah and Tommy were gone. Just like that. In the time it takes to draw a breath, James's entire world shattered into pieces too small to ever put back together. The grief that followed wasn't just sadness. It was a living thing, a weight that pressed down on his chest every morning when he woke up to an empty house, a silence so loud it screamed in his ears. The warmth that used to fill James, his easy smile, his quick laugh, the way he'd ruffle Tommy's hair, all of it froze over. He built walls around his heart, thick and high, because if he never felt anything again, then maybe it wouldn't hurt so much. Friends tried to reach him. Neighbors brought casseroles he never ate. His police chief offered time off that James refused, because work was all he had left. When he was chasing down leads or filling out reports or responding to calls, he didn't have to think about the empty bedroom down the hall. He didn't have to look at Tommy's baseball glove collecting dust. He didn't have to remember. So James became a ghost of himself, going through the motions, breathing but not really living, just surviving, one day at a time, in a world that suddenly felt cold and meaningless. 18 months passed like that. 18 months of ice. And then came the night that changed everything. It was a summer night in 1996, the kind where the heat sits heavy on your skin even after the sun goes down. James was finishing up paperwork at the station when the call came through. A house fire on Maple Street, structure fully engulfed, and then the words that made every officer's blood run cold: reports of children trapped inside. James grabbed his radio and ran to his car. He wasn't the fire department. He wasn't equipped for this. But something inside him, some part of him that still remembered what it meant to be a father, wouldn't let him wait. When he arrived at the scene, flames were shooting through the roof of a modest two-story home. The heat hit him like a wall, even from the street. Smoke poured into the night sky, thick and black and toxic. Other officers were setting up a perimeter, trying to keep neighbors back. Someone shouted at James to wait for the fire department. But he couldn't wait. He didn't think. He just moved. One foot in front of the other, straight toward the inferno. The front door was already gone, just a gaping mouth of fire. The heat inside was unbearable. It felt like breathing in razors. The smoke was so thick he couldn't see 2 feet in front of him. But James pushed forward, one hand on the wall, feeling his way through the burning house. And then he found them. In an upstairs bedroom, huddled together on the floor, were 3 little girls, unconscious, their faces covered in soot, their small bodies completely still. For a moment, just a heartbeat, James saw Tommy's face, and something inside him broke open. Their names were Sophie, Emma, and Lily Bennett, 10, 8, and 6 years old, sisters. And they were alone because their parents hadn't made it out. David and Rebecca Bennett had died trying to reach their daughters, overcome by smoke somewhere in the house below. James lifted Sophie first. She was so light, so fragile in his arms. He carried her down the stairs, through the flames, out to the front lawn where paramedics were waiting. Then he went back in. For Emma, his lungs were screaming. His skin felt like it was melting, but he went back in. And then one more time for Lily, the youngest, her small hand clutching her sister's stuffed bunny. When he laid that last little girl down on the grass and collapsed to his knees, coughing and gasping, something happened. Something shifted inside the ice fortress he'd built around his heart. He felt it crack. Just a little. Just enough. In the days that followed, James told himself he was just doing his job. That's why he kept going to Riverside General Hospital to check on the girls. That's why he'd sit in those uncomfortable plastic chairs outside their room, waiting for updates from the nurses. Just doing his job. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was more complicated. When he looked at Sophie, Emma, and Lily, he saw something he recognized. He saw three people whose lives had been torn apart in a single moment. Three people who went to bed one night in a normal, happy home and woke up in a nightmare. Three people who understood loss in a way that most people, thank God, never would. Sophie, the oldest, was trying so hard to be brave. At just 10 years old, she was holding her younger sisters together, comforting them even though her own world had collapsed. James saw himself in her, that same determination to be strong, to not break down, to be the one others could lean on. Emma was different. Despite everything, the fire, the hospital, losing her parents, she still smiled. Real smiles that reached her eyes. She'd tell jokes to the nurses. She'd hold Lily's hand and promise her that everything would be okay. Emma reminded James that hope could survive even in the darkest places. That light could exist alongside grief. And Lily, the youngest, she barely spoke. She just watched everything with those big, serious eyes, processing things no 6-year-old should ever have to process. But there was a strength in her silence, a resilience that James recognized because he'd felt it in himself during those 18 months of surviving. The more time James spent with these three girls, the more something inside him started to thaw. It was painful, like feeling returning to a limb that had fallen asleep, but it was also alive. For the first time since that winter night on Route 42, James felt something other than grief and numbness. He felt love, paternal, protective, overwhelming love. The thought came to him slowly at first, then all at once. What if he adopted them? What if he gave these girls a home, a family, a father? What if they gave him a reason to live again? But the fear was just as strong as the love. Could he really open his heart again? Could he survive losing someone else? Wasn't adopting these girls a betrayal of Sarah and Tommy's memory? How could he even think about replacing them? Every time he visited the hospital and saw the social worker discussing foster care placement, his chest tightened. The thought of Sophie, Emma, and Lily being separated, sent to different homes, losing each other on top of everything else they'd lost, it was unbearable. And the thought of them going to strangers, people who didn't understand what they'd been through, who couldn't see how special and brave and beautiful they were. No, James couldn't let that happen. He made his decision on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, standing in the hospital parking lot, watching rain stream down his windshield. He wasn't replacing Sarah and Tommy. He was honoring them. Sarah would have loved these girls. Tommy would have been the best big brother. And more than that, James still had love to give. His heart, frozen for so long, was beating again. And it was beating for Sophie, Emma, and Lily. The adoption process was brutal. Mountains of paperwork, background checks, home visits where social workers scrutinized every corner of his house, every aspect of his life. They asked hard questions. How would a single man with a demanding career care for three traumatized girls? Did he understand the challenges? Was he prepared for the financial burden, the emotional toll, the sheer exhaustion of single parenthood? James answered every question. He prepared his home, converting his office into a bedroom, painting walls in soft colors, buying beds and books and stuffed animals. He showed them his support system, his police chief who promised flexible scheduling, his sister who lived 2 towns over and was eager to help, the child psychologist he'd already contacted. But more than anything, he showed them his heart. He made it clear that this wasn't about filling a void or easing his loneliness. This was about 3 children who needed a father and a man who needed to love again. After 6 months, 6 long months of waiting and hoping and praying, the day finally came. James stood in a Riverside courtroom with Sophie, Emma, and Lily beside him. They were wearing new dresses. Their hair was brushed. Their hands were clasped together the way they always held each other for comfort. The judge reviewed the paperwork, asked James one final time if he understood the commitment he was making. And when James said yes, his voice steady and sure, the judge smiled and brought down the gavel. Adoption approved. Just like that, everything changed. James Mitchell wasn't just a detective anymore. He wasn't just a grieving widower, a man frozen in time, a ghost going through the motions. He was a father, again, to three beautiful, brave, broken girls who needed him as much as he needed them. As they walked out of that courtroom together, Sophie holding his right hand, Lily holding his left, Emma wrapping her arms around his waist, James felt something he hadn't felt in almost 2 years. He felt whole. The ice around his heart didn't just crack. It shattered completely, and in its place grew something stronger, something warmer, something that felt a lot like hope. This was their beginning, not an ending, not a replacement for what was lost, but a new chapter, a second chance. For all of them, saving them from the fire was the easy part. What came next? That was the real test. Because bringing three traumatized little girls into your home doesn't magically create a family. It creates chaos. It creates fear. It creates 100 small challenges every single day. And James was about to learn that being a father for the second time would be nothing like the first. The first morning in their new home, Sophie woke up screaming, a nightmare about the fire. James ran to her room and found all three girls huddled together in Sophie's bed, trembling. He didn't know what to say. What words could possibly make this better? So he just sat down on the edge of the bed and stayed there, silent, present, until Sophie's breathing slowed and the tears stopped falling. That became the pattern. James learning that sometimes the best thing he could offer wasn't solutions or promises, just presence. Emma struggled with reading at her new school. She'd get frustrated and throw her books across the room. Other kids were ahead of her, and she felt stupid, left behind. So every night after dinner, James would sit with her at the kitchen table. They'd read together, slowly, patiently. He'd make funny voices for the characters until she laughed. And gradually, week by week, the words started making sense. The stories started coming alive. Lily was the quietest. She'd go hours without speaking, just watching everyone with those serious eyes. Sometimes James would find her standing in front of the window, staring out at nothing. He worried constantly. Was she okay? Was he doing enough? Should he push her to talk or give her space? He chose space but made sure she knew he was always there, a hand on her shoulder when he passed. An extra tight hug at bedtime. Small reminders that she wasn't alone. The logistics of single parenthood hit James like a freight train. There were school drop-offs and pickups, 3 different schedules to coordinate. There were parent-teacher conferences, doctor's appointments, permission slips, field trip forms. There were groceries to buy, lunches to pack, laundry that multiplied like magic. And through it all, James still had to work, still had cases to solve, shifts to cover, emergencies to respond to. He established rules because structure felt safe. Bedtime at 8:30, homework before television, chores on Saturday morning, please and thank you at the dinner table. He was stern about these things, consistent, because he believed that if the girls knew what to expect, if their world had clear boundaries, maybe they'd feel more secure. But beneath that sternness was an ocean of tenderness. When Sophie had nightmares, and she had them often, James would pull a chair next to her bed and read to her until she fell back asleep. Sometimes he'd wake up hours later, stiff and sore, still sitting in that chair. When Emma brought home a math test with a big red A at the top, James stuck it on the refrigerator like it was a Picasso. When Lily finally spoke a full sentence after days of silence, "Can I have more juice, please?" James had to turn away so she wouldn't see the tears in his eyes. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, they became a family. The house that had been a tomb for 18 months came back to life. There were toys scattered on the living room floor, drawings taped to the walls, the sound of footsteps running up and down the stairs. Arguments over whose turn it was to pick the movie. Laughter, Real, genuine laughter echoing through the hallways. Friday nights became sacred. Movie night. The four of them would pile onto the couch with popcorn and blankets. The girls would fight over what to watch. Sophie wanted adventure movies. Emma loved comedies. Lily preferred animated films. They'd take turns choosing. And James would sit there, one girl tucked under each arm, and feel a peace he'd thought was lost forever. Dinner became storytelling time. James started sharing memories of Sarah and Tommy. At first it hurt, like reopening old wounds, but the girls wanted to know. They asked questions about Tommy's baseball games, about Sarah's famous chocolate chip cookies, about the life James had lived before. And in return, the girls shared memories of their parents, of their dad's terrible singing voice, of their mom's garden where she grew tomatoes every summer, of family trips to the beach. They weren't forgetting. They were remembering together, honoring the people they'd lost while building something new. James could see his son in Lily's rare smiles, that same mischievous sparkle. He could see Sarah's gentleness in the way Sophie cared for her sisters, and he could see both their spirits, that refusal to give up, that determination to find joy in Emma's endless optimism. The girls were healing, and so was he. But then came the teenage years, and James realized he'd been training for the wrong battle. Suddenly, Sophie wasn't just the responsible eldest daughter. She was a teenager drowning in pressure. Advanced classes, college applications, leadership positions at school. She pushed herself relentlessly, terrified of failure. James would find her at midnight, still studying, dark circles under her eyes. When he told her to rest, she'd snap at him. "You don't understand. I have to be perfect." It broke his heart because he knew where that pressure came from. Sophie felt like she had to earn her place in the family, had to prove she was worth saving. Emma became a tornado of energy and emotion. She tried everything: drama club, soccer team, art class, debate. She was searching for herself, for the thing that would make her special. But underneath all that exploration was fear. Fear that she'd always be the middle child. Not as responsible as Sophie, not as deep as Lily, just Emma. Sometimes overlooked, sometimes forgotten. And Lily, quiet, watchful Lily, started having panic attacks. The memories of the fire that had been vague in childhood became vivid and terrifying in adolescence. She'd smell smoke that wasn't there. She'd freeze when she heard sirens. James would find her sitting on the bathroom floor, hyperventilating, convinced she was dying. These weren't problems James could fix with rules and routines. These were deep wounds that needed time and therapy and patience. So he showed up every single day. He went to every school play Emma starred in, even the ones where she only had 2 lines. He sat with Sophie and helped her realize that she didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be herself. He held Lily during panic attacks and reminded her to breathe. In, out, in, out. You're safe. I'm here. You're safe. There were hard conversations about their biological parents, about the fire, about why bad things happen to good people. James didn't have all the answers. He couldn't explain why life was so unfair. But he listened. He validated their pain. He made it clear that grief didn't have an expiration date. They could miss their parents forever, and that was okay. And slowly, through tears and therapy and hundreds of difficult nights, they processed their trauma together. They learned that talking about pain didn't make it worse. It made it bearable. The teenage years tested them, but they came through it together, stronger, more honest, more real. And then suddenly the girls weren't girls anymore. They were young women, standing at the edge of adulthood, ready to step into the world. Sophie graduated at the top of her class and announced she was going to law school. She wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She wanted to be a voice for the voiceless. James wasn't surprised. He'd watched her sense of justice develop over the years. Every time she stood up for a bullied kid at school or argued passionately about fairness, he saw the lawyer she'd become. Law school was brutal. Sophie called him late at night, overwhelmed by case studies and legal theory. But she never quit, and when she passed the bar exam and opened her practice, James sat in the front row of the courtroom during her first trial, watching his daughter fight for justice, carrying forward the values he'd taught her. Emma chose medicine. She wanted to heal people, to ease suffering, to be there in people's darkest moments and help them find light. Her path took her through nursing school and then medical school. Long shifts, impossible hours, the emotional weight of caring for dying patients. But Emma never lost her optimism. Her patients loved her. Her colleagues admired her. And James's heart nearly burst with pride the day she received her white coat. But it was Lily's choice that hit James the hardest. She became a firefighter. When she told him, James couldn't speak. He just stared at his youngest daughter, this quiet, brave woman who'd survived fire once and was choosing to face it again, choosing to run toward the flames, choosing to save others the way she'd been saved. I have to, Lily said simply. I have to turn the worst thing that ever happened to me into something good. James understood. Of course he did. So he watched her go through Fire Academy, watched her train until her hands were calloused and her muscles ached, watched her graduate and join the Riverside Fire Department. And every single time she left for a shift, James said a prayer that she'd come home safe. The three of them, Sophie, Emma, and Lily, had become remarkable women. Women who dedicated their lives to service, to helping others, to making the world a little bit better. They'd taken the lessons James taught them and made them their own. And James had never been more proud. But life, as always, had one more test in store. James went in for a routine checkup, just a regular physical. Nothing to worry about. But the doctor found something, ran more tests. And then came the words that no one ever wants to hear. We need to talk about your diagnosis. Cancer, aggressive, requiring immediate treatment. James sat in that doctor's office, numb, while the physician explained chemotherapy and radiation and survival rates. All he could think was, not now, not when I finally have everything, not when my girls need me. He told Sophie, Emma, and Lily that night. They sat around the kitchen table, the same table where they'd done homework and shared meals for 27 years. And when James finished explaining, there was silence. Heavy, terrible silence. Then Sophie spoke. Her voice was steel. You saved us. Now we save you. And they did. Sophie dove into James's health insurance with the fury of a trained lawyer. She fought with insurance companies. She read every policy, every clause, every loophole. She made sure James got the coverage he needed, the treatments he deserved, without bankrupting them in the process. Her legal expertise became their shield against the broken healthcare system. Emma, now a doctor herself, took over coordinating James's care. She consulted with oncologists. She researched clinical trials. She attended every appointment, asked the hard questions, and translated complicated medical jargon into language James could understand. Her medical knowledge became their roadmap through the terrifying maze of cancer treatment. And Lily? Lily was their heart. She rearranged her shift schedule so she could drive James to chemotherapy. She sat with him during the long, horrible hours of treatment. She held his hand when the nausea hit. She made him laugh when he felt too weak to smile. Her presence became their anchor. The months that followed were brutal. There were bad days when James was so sick he couldn't get out of bed. Days when he wondered if the treatment was worth it. Days when the pain was so overwhelming he wanted to give up. But every time he looked at his daughters, these three incredible women who refused to lose him, James found the strength to keep fighting. Sophie's determination reminded him that he'd taught them never to quit. Emma's optimism reminded him that hope could survive anything. And Lily's quiet strength reminded him that he'd once run into a burning building to save three little girls. If he could do that, he could do this. Slowly, impossibly, James started to get better. The treatments were working. The cancer was retreating. His strength was returning. And one ordinary Tuesday morning, James's doctor said the words they had all been praying for. You're in remission. In the waiting room, Sophie, Emma, and Lily were sitting together, holding hands the way they'd done as children. When James walked out with tears streaming down his face and told them the news, they collapsed into each other. Crying, laughing, holding on to each other like they'd never let go. They'd done it, together, the way they always had. Looking back on everything from that terrible night in '96 when James pulled three unconscious girls from a fire to this moment of victory over cancer, the journey was clear. They'd been broken individually, but together they'd become unbreakable. James wasn't the same man who'd lost his wife and son in that winter accident. He'd been reborn through love and purpose. And Sophie, Emma, and Lily weren't just survivors of a tragic fire. They were warriors who'd turned their pain into power. They were proof that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, about showing up, about refusing to give up on each other even when everything feels impossible. They were a phoenix family, rising from the ashes, again and again, stronger every time. And as they walked out of that hospital together, James in the middle, his daughters surrounding him like a protective circle, they knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, whatever challenges life threw at them, they'd face it the same way they always had, together. Because that's what family does. Real family, chosen family, forever family. They hold each other up. They fight for each other. They save each other. Just like James once saved 3 little girls from a fire. And just like those 3 girls grew up to save him right back.